geeks and geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, comic book fans the globe over. Welcome back to Ask Chuck Dixon, where you get to ask me, world renowned, world famed, world celebrated writer of comic books. And you get to ask me about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living is, of course, write comic books. Let's get right to the questions. Patrick, oh boy, Patrick, Papa Nicolau. Papa Nicolau. Man, I need a Associated Press pronunciation guide is what I need. Anyway, question for a future episode. Well, the future is now, Patrick. I just picked up Booster Gold, the complete 2007 series, book one, and there's a couple of issues you wrote in it. How did briefly writing for Booster Gold come about? Yeah, I wrote two issues. Dan Jurgens wanted to have Booster Gold encounter the Bat Folks. And rather than write it himself, he graciously invited me to come up with a story about Booster Gold in Gotham City. And I jumped at the chance because first, I'm a big admirer of everything Dan does, both as a writer and an artist. And I've made that clear many, many times. And he's a great guy. And I was very flattered that a guy of his talent was willing to share his creation. He didn't have to. And I'm really, really happy because Booster Gold, time traveling, blah, blah, blah. I love that stuff. Even though it makes me schizophrenic when I write it, it allowed me to return to one of my favorite two-parters in Detective Comics about Wiley Dalber, a criminal who was traveling backwards in time and committing crimes as he went along. And I got to deal with time travel and alternate universes and all kinds of crazy stuff in this story. And I really dug it. I really had a great time. And thank you to Dan for picking me out of the crowd there to pinch hit a couple of issues for me. These two issues are among my favorite things of my own that I did at DC. So that's how it happened. No dark secrets or anything in there. It's a happy story, a happy comic book story. We need more of them. Rex Moss, a movie of book one, if complete, is a rather bloody R rating. I hope much of the torture is left to the imagination. Rex is referring, I guess, I hope, here to the Levon's Trade movie, which is upcoming, be released in January. They're shooting it right now. And his concern is, will the film maintain Levon's level of violence? The Levon Cade series level of 1970s crime thriller meanness. And I'm here to assure you that I'm not worried about that in the slightest. Because first of all, we've got a screenplay by Sylvester Stallone, who never shies away from the more gruesome, dark elements of an action thriller. And the screenplay is very, very close, astonishingly close to what I wrote in the novel. He's very, he adheres to my, characters and pacing, and I'm looking at the cast members and I'm like, whoa, I'm picking out, people that are playing characters I created, which is weird. So, getting started there with Stallone, okay, I'm in good shape here because he loves the material and he's not going to shy away from some of the more ghastly elements. And then we bring along David Ayer to direct. And David apparently has done a couple of rewrites on a few scenes, which I'm perfectly happy with. I got 2 Academy Award-winning screenwriters adapting my novel. I mean, who am I to complain? And Ayer, I couldn't have asked for a better choice unless Sly directed it himself. Because Ayer, man, he's done some of the meanest movies ever made, meanest action films ever made. I mean, Training Day, just nasty story, nasty cop thriller. And Fury, a unblinking cold, cynical look at the final days of World War II in Europe, which just fell into line with, some veterans are saying it wasn't like that and everything else. Well, the thing about veterans is none of them agree on anything. But I've heard so many stories right from vets who were, there when the United States Army invaded Germany, crossed over the Rhine, and Fury just matches up, mood and event wise with everything those guys told me. And again, David Ayer writing and directing, awesome. David Ayer also wrote and directed Sabotage, which for my money is the meanest, most badass, most cynical, darkest police thriller ever made. So I got no problem with these guys, and then you got Jason Statham who's going to bring it. And the rest of the cast I'm looking at, I'm real happy with everyone else that they've cast in this movie. And, signs are good, and the movie fan base seems to be getting on board with this movie and excited and starting to understand why this was chosen as Jason Statham's next franchise. And it is going to be a franchise. As long as Levon's trade is profitable, there's already 2 more adaptations in the pipeline. So, I'm in good shape. I got no worries as a creator of any kind about this movie. It is not going to punk out. It's not going to go wimpy. And it is going to be a hard R. I'm certain of it. Mattel Jones, what are some of your favorite 70s era men's adventure type paperback pulp series characters? Given your sense of humor, I imagine you liking The Destroyer. But there are so many to choose from. I enjoy Mike Barry's, aka Barry Malzberg, the Lone Wolf books myself. I never read any Lone Wolf. I remember seeing it on the paperback stands. And I think it was a long-running series, if I'm not mistaken. But I never gave it a spin. Maybe I will. Maybe I'll pick a couple of these up. And I did. I read a lot of Destroyer. It's one of the few of these kind of books where I would read one and then just read another. Usually I mix stuff up when I'm reading. But it was just like, I just want to see. I just want more Remo and Chion, fun stuff. So yeah, I read, I must have read 50 of them. But my favorite will always be The Inquisitor. I think there's only 6 books in the series. It's written by Simon Quinn, which was a pen name of Martin Cruz Smith, who some of you may remember was a best-selling New York Times and internationally best-selling author of things like Gorky Park. And he apparently owns the rights to this series, and he's embarrassed by it, so he will never allow these to be reprinted. So I've probably just driven up the cost of these on eBay, but if you can ever find any of these, they're really, really well written. I mean, they have everything you want in a 70s men's adventure. That's sex and violence and all the rest of it, but each one it's closer to an Ian Fleming Bond novel. And The Inquisitor is I can't remember the character's name, Jean-Claude Keely or something like that. But anyway, he's an inquisitor. He's sort of a lay priest for the Catholic Church, and he's a spy. He's a James Bond of the Vatican, and he goes on missions directed by the Jesuits on orders from the Pope to go out and do face threats that might endanger the church or inconvenience the church. And after he's killed a whole bunch of people, he has a special dispensation to kill the church's enemies. He comes back and he has to do penance. He has to go to confession. And I just loved it. As a lapsed Catholic, I just really, really dig this series. And I've reread a few of these a number of times. And also his crimes, some of these have heist elements, chase elements. Everyone is different. Very, very different from the other, which is like the Bond novels. The Bond novels aren't formulaic like the Bond movies. They're different. in structure and everything else. And the Inquisitor novels are the same way, and they're all super well researched. I learned a lot. I remember during I was living in Pennsylvania during 3 Mile Island, the possible nuclear meltdown we all faced in the 1970s. And I remember the only reliable information I could get was from an Inquisitor novel called Nuplex Red, which detailed what would happen if the atomic reactor melted down. And the book accurately predicted how the state of Pennsylvania would react to the disaster or impending disaster or possible disaster. Especially remember that in the Inquisitor that he has a mission involving a rogue nuclear weapon. He has to take iodine tablets to prevent the absorption, not prevent, but make him more radiation resistant, so that he would pass the radiation out of his bloodstream quicker. And the state of Pennsylvania began handing out iodine tablets to all the people around Middletown, Pennsylvania. So it was a reliable, almost encyclopedia on what to do. Anyway, if you can find any of these, they're absolutely brilliant. Absolutely. I could go on and on about the Inquisitor. I just love this series so much. Chris W. So, if the legendary Edgar Rice Burroughs made comments like this in reference to the start of his writing career, does this make him a hack? Quoting Burroughs, I had gone thoroughly through some of the all-fiction magazines, and I made up my mind that if people were paid for writing such rot as I read, I could write stories just as rotten. Another quote from Burroughs, I was not writing because of any urge to write, nor for any particular love of writing. I was writing because I had a wife and 2 babies, a combination which does not work well without money. Another Edgar Rice Burroughs quote that I'm paraphrasing here is that he could write just as bad as anyone else. So was he a hack? I argue no. I think he was being self-effacing. I think he's being funny and tongue-in-cheek here. He had a vivid imagination, which didn't start the day he started writing. He held many jobs. He was in the cavalry with General Pershing, chasing Apaches around the Southwest, American Southwest. He was a railroad detective. He was a whole bunch of different jobs, and found himself unemployed and thought, well, let me take a swing at this writing thing. I mean, obviously, he was a literate guy. Obviously, he was a bit of a daydreamer. I mean, you can't convince me he wasn't. And when he said those things, he's just being self-effacing. I mean, he was a blue-collar kind of hands-on guy. He was never one to claim that he was an intellectual. He never made any attempts to write literature. There was no great American novel in him. He was a journeyman writer, and there's nothing wrong with that. But a journeyman writer does not have to be a hack, and I argue he was not a hack. A hack could simply not create Tarzan. I mean, these were his characters. He created this rich, rich world, and in all of his different series, he created this rich, deep universe that was consistent. I mean, if he was a hack, he wouldn't care about continuity and consistency. He wouldn't give a crap about that. He would just worry about how much he was being paid per word. Just fill up those pages. And that's what hacks did in those days. They were paid by the word, sometimes a penny a word. And so you would just, you worried about your word count more than anything else. And you just pour a bunch of crap on the page. And if you read a lot of writing from those days, from the pulps, a lot of it is very redundant. There's run-on scenes. It could have been a lot shorter, but the writers needed the word count. This doesn't happen with Edgar Rice Burroughs. His books are packed with stuff. I mean, his stories move along at this blistering pace for the most part. He writes action like almost no one else. He is by far and away my favorite action writer, and I will argue one of the greatest writers of action, if not the greatest writers of action, ever to put words on paper. And that's not a hack. You can't do that if you don't care. And that's basically what a hack is. They're writing about stuff. They don't give a crap about what they're writing. They're just thinking about that paycheck. Was he writing for money? Yeah, I write for money. I'm a professional writer, but I still love it. I still, I look forward to it every day. I enjoy getting lost in these things, these creations in my mind, and you cannot argue that Burroughs must have done the same thing. The other, even more irrefutable argument that, that Burroughs was not a hack was that if you're a hack, like I said, you're looking at your word count and you're like, well, I'm getting nearer and nearer and nearer to the count I need to fill this, this chapter, this serial, or this novel. And if you read Burroughs, and you know exactly what I'm talking about, if you've read Burroughs, you know he wasn't looking at his word count as he wrote, because there are a lot of Burroughs novels that you're reading them and you're like, wow, there's so much going on here. There's so many things in the story that are unresolved. And if you're reading them in a book, you're looking and you're like, there's not many pages left. How's he going to wrap all this stuff up? Like, there's not many pages left. Well, he would wrap them up in a hurry. Because I think what Burroughs would do was he would just get lost in what he was writing and just write, pounding away at that old typewriter, and then realize too late, oh my God, I'm almost to the word count. And the thing is, you couldn't go over that word count for the pulps because they had that calculated how many pages of the magazine that novel was going to take up. That final chapter of that serialization was going to take up. And so he's like, I needed 15,000 words. Here I am at word 14,650. And I still got, Jane lost in the jungle and Tarzan, fighting an elephant, and, Korak, in the Paris, sewers fighting a gang. And how am I going to wrap? And he would just wrap it up in a hurry. So many times Burroughs novels end with what almost seems like cliff notes just to get him to that word count and out. That's not a hack. A hack would be really, really aware of the word count as they go along. And this to me points to that Burroughs was just lost in this dream world of his imagination as he wrote. And good for him. So no, Burroughs was not a hack, no matter what Burroughs said. He was not a hack. Matt Strott, thanks for answering my question on today's show. The discussion about historical figures jogged my memory of a couple of books I liked. Have you ever read any historical fiction by Stephen Pressfield? How would you rate his work for accuracy? I'm no historian, but I found both Gates of Fire and The Virtues of War to be entertaining reads. Would you recommend his other books, or is there a better writer you like for historical fiction? I started reading Gates of Fire. I got a few chapters into it. I found the writing somewhat anachronistic. Some of the dialogue bothered me, and the way he described things just felt a little too contemporary for me, and I quickly lost interest and put the book aside and never picked it up again. So maybe his stuff got better as it went along, but I'll never know because I didn't like it. He's a best-selling author, so apparently a lot of people did like it. And if you like Stephen Pressfield, God bless you. I don't know how accurate or inaccurate his books were because I didn't get far enough into it to find out. But there was just his use of language. To me, in a historical novel, you don't want to write stilted, but you don't want to write too contemporary. You don't want to be using words that just don't fit. Words that might have been created in the last few decades. Words that Jane Austen wouldn't use as a guideline. Now, as for historical fiction guys I do like, there's a guy, Alfred Duggan, who wrote a whole lot of books. He started writing very, very late in life. He was practically a senior citizen when he began writing, and he wrote all these tons of historical novels. Most of them set in the Middle Ages. a number of them set during the Roman Empire. This one is Three's Company. It's about the triumvirate that was formed following the death of Julius Caesar. And it mostly talks about Lepidus, the member of the triumvirate that nobody really ever talks about, because the triumvirate famously was Mark Antony and Octavius, who would go on to become Augustus Caesar, and Lepidus. And here Duggan tells the story of Lepidus. His research is impeccable. His getting into the minds of people from that period is amazing, absolutely amazing. He has a book called Night Without Honor that ends with the most incredible action scene of crusaders charging across the bridge of a siege tower onto a Muslim stronghold. And I read it as a young man, and I finally understood through Duggan's writing what would make someone do that, charge toward, some forlorn hope, what would motivate them to do something that crazy. And stuff is really good. If you ever get a chance, check it out. Of course, Bernard Cornwell, from his Sharp novels, which are basically ho-de-ho adventure stories. They're basically westerns set in the Napoleonic era. There's nothing wrong with that. All well researched, lots of fun, lots of action. To his more serious series like the Grail series and the Last Kingdom series, all well researched, terrific characters, amazing action scenes, well drawn, suspenseful page turners. There's nothing at all wrong with Cornwell. I dig his stuff a lot. Con Eagleton, who's extremely prolific, and I've yet to catch up with everything he did. His series is about the Roman Empire, but my favorite series of his is Genghis Khan books. He takes Genghis Khan's story from his youth all the way through, and even past his death. The series continues with his sons and heirs as they basically take over most of the known world, the biggest, largest in geographical space empire ever on this planet, and just a terrific epic story. But my favorite of all will always be George MacDonald Fraser. His Flashman books about the cowardly, womanizing, lying Harry Flashman during the Victorian era, the Empire era of Britain. They'll always be my favorite historical adventures because they're told from the point of view of a coward, and amazingly well researched. The dialogue is priceless, and it's all in period. Just incredible stuff. And as I've said often in these videos, Flashman at the Charge is a book that I either reread or listen to at least once a year. I just love this book, Harry Flashman at Balaclava, at the Charge of the Light Brigade, and the horrible things that happened to him after that. The Charge of the Light Brigade is just the beginning of this story. So I urge you, if you like historical fiction, check out Flashman at the Charge. Funny, sometimes extremely dark, but a terrific adventure story told from the point of view of a guy who really would rather avoid these adventures, which to me is what makes it all the more believable. Okay, Brian White, which prompts me, what prompts you? Something else. I don't always include the entire email here. Anyway, which prompts me to ask Chuck Dixon, do you often ever visit the places you set stories while writing, or do you mostly do Google research? Yes, much like Burroughs, who never visited Africa, I haven't visited all the places that I write about. But I met people from those regions and try to get a feel from questions I ask them and things they tell me. I don't actively do research. I don't try to find people like, hey, have you ever been to this town? What's it like? I just have met people and I just remember what they say about their hometown or their region or the county they grew up in or whatever. And you just sort of listen and try to capture details, try to capture idiosyncrasies in regional languages and things like that. And, like for the Levon books, I do a lot of Google driving. If you go to Google Maps, you can actually drive up and down roads in places. But of course, for the Levon's books, the county that Levon lives in, I made up. And the little town and the slightly larger town that he lives near, they're fictional. So I don't have to worry about anybody going, there's no Walmart there. Well, there is in my mind because I made it up. But the rest of the locations, well, I had to make up a town in Florida in Levon's trade because this vile biker gang lived there as their headquarters. And I didn't want to put that on any actual Florida town. So I just made a town up. But for the most part, it's a lot of Google driving, which really helped when I sent Levon to Iraq, because I could drive through Mosul, virtually, and see what it looked like, and be able to describe things and everything else. So yeah, a lot of Google Maps, a lot of searching around, but largely I start with locations that I've met people from, so that I can understand the attitudes and some of the little tiny details that make people from those areas think I've been there. I'm a good at listening. It's like back when I wrote Alien Legion and I wrote Jugger Grimrod, and he had for some reason East London phrasing that he would use, plus a lot of made up stuff, and a number of people asked me if I was English, which I'm not. I just there was a family member married a guy from East London, and I spent a lot of time talking to him, and I picked up a lot of stuff, and coincidentally, around I had known him for about a year, and I got the assignment to do Alien Legion. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm writing Jugger Grimrod. I'm just going to use this guy's voice and phrasing and things he says. So it's what writers do. As Friedrich Nietzsche said, writers use their own and their friends' intellects. Creeper Weirdo, welcome back. What do you think of the various punk genres? Steam, cyber, diesel, bio, atom, etc. Any great comics you recommend for any of these? Short answer is no. I don't like the whole punk idea. I know there's a Western punk. There was splatter punk for horror. I don't quite get it. To me, it implies that within these subgenres, these mashup genres, there are rules. And I don't like writing with rules for a genre. It's one of the reasons I stopped reading science fiction in the late 70s, because a whole crowd of people showed up saying, well, there are rules. When you do space travel and time travel. No, there's no rules. It's whatever you make up. And if you don't follow these rules, you're not recognized as a writer. It's like, well, screw all that. And, putting rules to, horror and things like that. And cyberpunk, I don't know. I guess it's fun for cosplayers. I'm going to put some goggles on a top hat. I don't know. I'd rather that they didn't do that. I'd rather that they didn't try to make it a genre. I mean, there are steampunk elements, or before it was steampunk, they were just anachronistic elements and things. I'm using this example of this drawing by Mobius. A obvious science fiction thing where the guy's wearing a Kitchener helmet. That kind of stuff's cool, but Mobius just drew this stuff from his imagination. He wasn't thinking, oh, I'm going to make this thing to look like it's part of this made up subgenre of fiction. I just don't like categorizing stuff like that. I resist it. I've probably written things that, well, I know I have. I did a Transformers, a couple of Transformers stories set in the Steam Age, set in the late 1800s during the Industrial Revolution, and I never once thought of them as steampunk, even though steampunk was a thing at the time. It just never entered my mind, and I begged IDW, oh, please don't ever mention the word steampunk in relation to these stories, because I didn't draw my inspiration from steampunk. I drew my inspiration from the Transformers and the historical era in which I'm setting the story. I hope you can see what I mean. Now, of all the punk genres, the one that annoyed me the most, even at the time, was cyberpunk. The idea of cyberpunk is that basically that these geeks and nerds would be, attractive, muscle-bound, people that looked like they came from a new wave band, and they knew the secrets of the internet, before the internet even had a name, or before there was a World Wide Web. You had these cyberpunk characters who could travel through cyberspace, doing things virtually, and blah, and it was all BS. I when cyberpunk came along, I already knew about the phone freaks. The phone freaks predated today's hackers, where they would be able to use public payphones to do things like, get into other government agencies and banks' phone systems. And they knew all these secrets of the different dial tones and things like that. And so cyberpunk comes along and tries to romanticize that kind of a character, which we all knew. This is deeply nerdy, deeply geeky people, and try to turn them into these anti-establishment heroes. And the thing of it is that cyberpunk, of all of these genres, is the most redundant now, because we're all cyberpunks now. We're all, you're probably listening to me on a device you're holding in your hand while, driving your car. So you're a cyberpunk. You're doing something cooler than anybody in that novel did. So to me, it was really weird to create a genre that tried to predict the future of a technology that was moving so fast that you might predict something happening 10 years from now, and it happens 6 months later. Things are happening before your book was even published. And today it's impossible. I mean, look at how swiftly things are moving. It's impossible to predict what's coming next, and more importantly, what its significance will be to the world. We hear all these promises. I mean, we're still living in a world where the promise of the internet and the promise of all these devices and the promises of all these interconnectivity, these promises have never been met. These machines, these devices, they don't entirely do what we expect them to do. So yeah, I mean, the punk subgenres, I think I made it quite obvious, I just have no use for. I guess if you're cosplaying or just goofing around or role playing and things like that, you're fine. I mean, I'm if you like something, God bless you. I'm glad you found something you really like and have fun with it. But from a writer's standpoint, I just find it restrictive. It's like, you're in this genre. We're pitching you, holding you over here. My whole career has been dedicated to never being a specialist in any genre. And I especially don't like it when I do something and then it gets identified as, you wrote it in this style. No, I really didn't. Because I'm not even really aware what that style is or what the parameters are for that style. Enough of that. Twin spin. Here we go. Creeper Weirdo, thank you for this one. You bring up Fantagraphics a lot. Is there any other comic companies you recommend? Yes, Epicenter Comics. Epicenter Comics does not get the love and attention that it deserves. Epicenter is largely, I think entirely, devoted to reprinting Italian comics from Bonelli, the largest Italian comic book publisher. And this stuff is freaking awesome. I've gone on and on and on about it on other videos, but they're reprinting text, they're reprinting Zagor, and in a lot of cases, they are big honking hardcovers, which might be $25-$30, but the value's there because these things are usually in excess of 300 pages. Beautiful black and white artwork, fantastic storytelling, terrific engaging stories. If you don't like Westerns, you don't want to read text, pick up this Zagor, The Lost World, if you can find it. It is an awesome, absolutely awesome, Lost World dinosaur adventure story. Just incredible. Just keeps delivering and delivering. Artwork is fantastic. Just beautiful, beautiful. Think of all of the Epicenter stuff is like a Dell comic amped up to 11. And they do the Dylan Dog series, which they do some color volumes. I think are like $9, but you get a complete like 100-page story, and the artwork is beautiful. A lot of watercolor, a lot of color inks and stuff like that. Also, Magic Wind, which is a supernatural Western series featuring a half-breed Indian getting involved with all kinds of Native American mythology and supernatural stuff. Plus, Edgar Allan Poe is a recurring character in the series, and most entertainingly, Poe is comic relief a lot of times in the Magic Wind series, and just awesome stuff. And then they do all kinds of other genres, from fantasy, science fiction. They did this one-off zombie thriller, which was really cool. But I urge you to look for Epicenter Comics. You either go to Epicenter. The best thing to do is go to epicenter.com and take a look at what they've got. And if you like something, buy it, because they do limited print runs and they run out. And like I said, the price point might be $25, anywhere from $10 to $25 to $30, but the value is there. These are comics you'll want to reread. So I think I've said enough. And this is not a commercial for Epicenter. I get nothing from Epicenter. I've been in communication with them because they tell me they want to reprint my text stories in English for the first time, which I'm super pumped about. But I don't get comps. I get nothing from them. I have no business relationship with Epicenter at all. I just think that more people in the United States, and I guess England as well, the UK and Australia, if you're listening, New Zealand, hi. I think these deserve more attention, and I'm saying this for selfish reasons, because I want them to be extremely successful, so they keep doing these volumes, because I look forward to each and every one. Joshua Ignatowski, welcome back. When writing a monthly, what's the ratio you want to have of multi-issue stories where each issue ends in a cliffhanger versus issues whose main plot lines get resolved in 22 pages? I'd imagine you will want some of both. There's a lot of different reasons for doing one-offs sprinkled through. I mean, this is back in the day. I don't do regular monthlies anymore, so sadly, I have no reason to write one-offs. But back in the day, there were a lot of reasons to do one-off stories, and generally it had to do with the trades. If you had, and it also had to do with the placement of intercompany crossovers, particularly at DC, where we regularly, a couple of times a year, had these intercompany events that your book would have to, acknowledge. And so every once in a while, I would have to write a one-off issue to keep the spacing right, so that some of the intercompany crossover things were one-off issues. So there was a practical reason to do these, and especially, using an example of Nightwing, where I was writing way ahead, and sometimes I would get so far ahead that a intercompany event would catch up with me, and my editor, Scott Peterson, would call and say, "Hey, this arc is going to be interrupted. This 3-issue arc of yours is going to be interrupted by a intercompany event, a cross company event, like 1 million or 0 hour or something like that." And so, because I was writing so far ahead, months and months and months ahead, I would say, well, let me write a one-off issue, and it'll set the beginning of that arc off a month, and then we can fit that, event issue, that crossover event issue in between the two. And we juggle things like that all the time. It's never an inconvenience, and it was an excuse to write one-offs. And of course, one-offs are harder to write. And then, again, in the using the example of Nightwing, Scott Peterson suggested that I write a one-off issue, the kind of issue that real hardcore comic book fans like, of Nightwing and Robin basically talking, right? And they explore their relationship, and they would compare their own experiences at being Robin, and sort of bring the two closer together, because they're like, sort of brothers from another mother. And I thought, yeah, well, that's interesting, but I refuse to write an issue where the characters just talk all the time. Probably one of the reasons DC never calls me to write anything anymore. I hate issues where they just talk and talk. So I had them. I accomplished everything that the editors wanted, but I put it in the middle of an adventure story with lots and lots of action. So they get to talk, they get to relate, and then the action sort of intersperses to provide some visual, eye candy. But then the action also feeds into what they were talking about, so it all ties in and relates. See, that's what writers do. I was very happy with it, and apparently readers are very happy with it, because I sign a lot of these. People tell me it's their favorite issue of Nightwing. Some people tell me it's their favorite comic book ever, which is really, really cool. But that's another reason. Now, when I was on Detective with Graham Nolan, he and I both wanted to write like these unforgettable, memorable one-off stories, and we did quite a few of them. And we're inspired by things like Will Eisner's 10 Minutes, things like that. Stories that you read this comic book story, you just never forgot it. It's high concept story with a solid opening, engaging middle, and then this climax that made you go, whoa, that was a good story. So that was our aim with Graham and I, to write put together a number of these things. And then every once in a while your editor calls and says, Brian Stelfreeze would like to draw an issue of Detective. Can you come up with a story for him? I was like, yeah, I want to do that. If Brian Stelfreeze wants a Batman story, I'm going to write one for him. And that's one of the beauties of writing one-offs, is because they stand alone, because they're a one-off story, not connected to others, and because they're 22 pages long, they easily fit into collections. This issue in particular has been in so many different Batman collections, I've lost count. And of course, that means more money. So, I did a one-off story for Iron Man, the only Iron Man story I ever wrote. And it gets thrown into collections all the time because, the reprint editor's going, wow, we need another story to fill out this page count. Hey, there's this one-off Iron Man story. It fits perfectly. And they just throw it into the collection. And, so a lot of times these one-off stories end up paying off more than the longer arc stories, because they just get reprinted over and over and over and over again, which pleases me no end. I like to know that people are reading this stuff. So like I said, there's a lot of reasons you might do a one-off story. You either just thought of an awesome one-off story and you want to do it, or it's an editorially driven. You're given the task of writing a one-off for scheduling problems, or an artist comes along and says, hey, I really want to draw Batman, or I really want to draw whatever it is that you're drawing at the time. And kaboom, you go for it. So there you go. Ignatowski Twin Spin. How did you first get into Zoids? Zoids are Japanese mechanical toy, basically a mecha toy based on actual prehistoric animals. I first got into them. I wasn't aware of them at all, but I would go over and visit Flint Henry. Flint Henry had this apartment that was kind of his whole apartment was a man cave of Japanese collectibles. Macross, Mazinger, Gundam, all that stuff. Flint was really into it. And of course, Flint, I guess, welcomed me into his apartment. He had his art studio there, and we were doing a lot of projects together. But he also let me in with some trepidation, because I couldn't resist trying to play with these things. And they would inevitably fall apart. Guns would fall out of their hands and go under the couch where they might be vacuumed up later. So, Flint put up with it, but but the things that didn't fall apart were Zoids. Zoids were pretty solid. He had all of them. He had every Zoid, and he would just put them together. But I started getting them and painting them and customizing them. and I really dug it. I forget where I got this figure. He was a caveman figure that I kind of turned into Arnold Schwarzenegger to ride around in this thing. And like I said, they were mechanized, and so you wind them up and they would walk around. And I really dug this whatever it's supposed to be, and and enjoyed. I did the desert camo, and I did a desert camo Zoid T-Rex. And again, you would wind these things up and they'd walk around and light up. And really cool stuff. I did a couple of the Iron Kongs, and they're in storage. I haven't seen them in a while. I got to dig them out because I did one. I think one in snow camo, and another one in forest camo, and they were a blast. And I love the way these things moved. So, but I haven't built Zoids in decades, but I still just keep them around. And I had a lot of fun with them, and various pets we've had enjoyed them as well. And by enjoyed, I mean they freak them out because they're pretty big. They're pretty big toys. They're 1/72nd scale, but they're pretty enormous. Triple spin, yo. Okay, Joshua, he wants to know, do you know some of the tricks that can be used to boost one's confidence and ignorance that all writers need? As I always say, a writer needs a mix of ignorance and confidence. You have to be sure of yourself when you're writing that your stuff is good, and you have to be ignorant of the fact that it probably sucks. So you keep going. And you write until somebody tells you, wow, this doesn't suck anymore, and they give you money. But even when they're telling you it sucks, you have to maintain this hubris, this level of confidence that tells you they're wrong. My work doesn't suck. Even if it did, you've got to go, take that long train ride home or that long bus ride home thinking they rejected me, but they're wrong. I'll show them all one day. I'm a genius. They just don't understand me. And when I was first trying to break into comics, my stuff was feeble and horrible and poorly constructed and awful. And it was just the product of a fevered imagination with no structure or anything else. But then, I realized that if I was ever going to be getting any advice, any honest opinions on what it was I was doing wrong and possibly what I was doing right, I would not seek out. I would seek out editors whose work I liked, editors who were also writers, because I thought if there was an editor and I liked his writing, then there must be some connection between the two of us, because there's something, I see something in him, maybe he'll see something in me, and there's a reason why I like his writing. It's because it speaks to me. So maybe it, in some Venn diagram, to mix metaphors, we're on the same page somewhere. And so I actively sought out Archie Goodwin because I loved everything Archie wrote. I was hugely inspired by everything Archie wrote. And I felt, this guy gets it, and maybe he'll get me, because he and I appreciate the same kind of storytelling, the same balance of words and pictures. We had this, I felt I had the same kind of approach, probably inspired by Archie Goodwin, to comics as Archie did. And I also liked the fact that he did historical stuff, and he would do the research and, make an effort to get things historically accurate. And I always appreciated that. And I always wanted to be that way. I liked doing the research. And it just seemed like we would have a connection. And thankfully we did. And, also thankfully Archie had extremely patient man. Who would look over my miserable offerings. Absolutely, I had no idea how to write comics. And I would present him with these pitches and things like that. And he would always see something in them that make them better. Like, well, if you did this, or this is what we need, or, move this to here. And it was always terrific advice, which I was always grateful for because it meant he actually read it. Sometimes reading it in front of me made me sweat bullets. But, so, Archie was a guy I approached. Another guy I approached was Larry Hama, who was the opposite of Archie because he was not initially a generous man. Archie's idea of, or Larry's idea of how to, Larry Hama's idea of how to put test a writer was to literally test them like a baptism of fire, to dip their toes in acid and pull out a few of their fingernails, see how they react. His initial reaction to anybody who approached him with either stories or art was to tell them they were awful, tell them they sucked, tell them to go away and never come back. That was the test. Now, if you went away and never came back, you failed the test. If you came back and said, screw you, Larry, I know I'm good. Take a look at these. And then he was like, okay, all right, you came back, which means you can work under pressure. You are not a prima donna. You are not an idiot who doesn't know how to take criticism. And I was anxious for anybody to basically show me the way. And Larry did a lot of that, just like Archie. Very, very gentle. Once I was through that gate, once I was through that threshold, Larry could not have been more generous with his time and his suggestions and things like that. And we got along great. And, and both of these guys, Archie and Larry, inspired me to do some of my best work because, when you have people that are really, really talented editing your work, people that can actually do the job and do it well, and they like your stuff, it lifts you. It gives you, you have a faith where you're not sitting second guessing yourself while you're writing. You're gonna fly. So there you go. Now, one more thing. I've had this question from a number of you, so it's unfair to pick out one person's question. But a number of you have asked, is there a song that it would inspire you to write a story or a comic just based on that song? And the answer is immediate. I mean, there's no 3 or 4 options. There's one option, always comes to me instantly. There's a song by Steve Earle, country western guy, awesome guitarist. And the story is called, the song is called Copperhead Road. And if you've ever heard it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Copperhead Road is about a young guy whose family is in the moonshine business up in the hills of Tennessee. And the things that happen to his family with the government agents and the local sheriff and all the rest of it. And the song goes on that the guy singing the song, the character in the story, he's not gonna grow moonshine like his grandpappy and his daddy did, because he'd been to Vietnam and he got a few ideas while he was there, and he comes back and he's determined he's gonna grow marijuana up in the hollers. And then the song goes on about how the helicopters, the DEA helicopters overhead, make him think like he's back in Vietnam. And that's basically where the story takes you. But I love the story. It's got a terrific beat. It's on, I'll put a link to the song below where you listen to it on YouTube. But just an incredible song. And I connect with it. First of all, the story's all there. I mean, I could write that as a novel or whatever in a heartbeat, or graphic novel in a heartbeat. It's all there. But I think a lot of it is that it connects. The Dixon family have their roots in the South. Dixon family was certainly into the white lightning business at different times. So it all sort of connects back to a Scots-Irish cultural heritage. And Steve Earle seems to understand that as well, because it's I think it's the only country western song I've ever heard that has bagpipes in it. So there you go. There you go. That would be the story, without a doubt, that I would jump all over given the chance. I don't know why no one has. I'm sure Steve Earle signed a bunch of options to make that song into a movie, because you listen to it and you instantly see a movie in your head. Anyway, I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for watching, liking, subscribing, all the rest. And I'll see every last one of you down the road.